Tonight we journey deep into the heart of Central Africa, into a world where the very air hums with the buzz of life and the rustle of leaves speaks a language of creation. You stand at the edge of a vast rainforest, a realm of towering trees and dappled sunlight, where the humidity wraps around you like a warm, damp cloth. This is not a wilderness waiting to be tamed. It is a generous, demanding partner, and its greatest gift is the raffia palm. You hear the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a wooden mallet long before you see the source, a sound that is the heartbeat of a kingdom. This is the Kingdom of Kongo, a civilization whose power and sophistication were woven, quite literally, from the fibers of its landscape. You're about to step into a world where cloth was more than just fabric. It was money, art, history, and identity, all threaded together on a loom. And let's be real, if you were dropped into this rainforest with just your wits, you probably wouldn't last a week, let alone master the complex alchemy of turning a spiky leaf into a king's robe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push aside a curtain of hanging vines, and the sound of the mallet grows clearer, now joined by the soft, percussive shuffle of someone working. You're not in a grand palace of stone, not yet. You're at the source, the very beginning of everything. Before kings and currencies, there is the palm. The raffia palm is the unsung hero of this story, a tree that offers its leaves for roofing, its sap for wine, and its fibrous, incredibly tough fronds for the thread that will build an empire. You watch a craftsman, his hands calloused and sure, select a long, green leaf. With a practiced motion, he splits the central rib and begins to peel away strips of the surface, revealing the inner fibers. This isn't a gentle process. It's a battle of patience and strength against a plant that does not give up its treasures easily. The air is thick with the scent of crushed vegetation and damp earth. The mallet you've been hearing comes into view now, as another artisan takes a bundle of these peeled fibers and begins to beat them on a smooth, worn log. This isn't random pounding, it's a precise, rhythmic tenderization. Each strike softens the rigid cellulose, making the fibers pliable, preparing them for their transformation. You can feel the vibration in your own feet, a steady, grounding pulse. This is the foundational technology of the kingdom, a process so vital and so ancient that its origins are lost to time, whispered about in the myths of culture heroes who taught the people how to speak with the plants. Historians still argue whether this specific beating technique was developed here in Congo or migrated with Bantu-speaking peoples over millennia. But standing here, watching it, it feels utterly and completely indigenous, born from the intimate relationship between these people and this specific tree. After the beating, the fibers are combed, drawn through a set of wooden teeth or even a handful of thorns to separate and align them. What was once a rough, leafy strip begins to resemble thread, a coarse, tan-colored string of immense potential. This is your first glimpse of the raw material of power. It's not gleaming gold or glittering gemstones, it's this humble, sturdy thread. And the sheer amount of labor involved is staggering. Just to produce enough thread for a single small cloth could take days. This is where the value is born, not from scarcity, but from skill and time, from the literal investment of human energy into the natural world. It's a concept that feels alien in our age of fast fashion, where a shirt can be produced in minutes by a machine on the other side of the planet. Here, every thread has a story, every fiber has been touched, softened, and prepared by hands that know the forest secrets. You follow the thread as it is wound onto a spindle, a simple weighted stick that twists it, adding strength. The weaver is usually a man, seated before a loom that is as elegant in its simplicity as it is ingenious in its function. The loom is a tension loom, often just two sticks between which the vertical warp threads are stretched, sometimes tied to a tree and the weaver's own waist. His body becomes part of the machine. He leans back to tighten the threads, forward to relax them. With a rhythmic, rocking motion, he passes the horizontal weft thread through the warp, a small wooden sword-like tool packing each new thread tightly against the last. Click-clack. Rock forward. Pull tight. It's a hypnotic dance, a meditation in motion. The cloth doesn't just appear. It grows, slowly, organically, like a living thing. This is the loom's whisper, the quiet, persistent sound of a civilization building itself, one thread at a time. That humble, growing square of cloth on the loom is far more than just a piece of fabric. It is a compact of social agreement, a ledger of obligation, and a certificate of status. As you watch the weaver's hands fly, you begin to understand that each click-clack of the loom isn't just building textile, it's weaving the very fabric of Kongo society. This raffia cloth, known as libongo, is the kingdom's lifeblood, and you're about to learn how to spend it. You probably think of money as coins jingling in a pocket or numbers on a screen, but here, currency is something you can feel, something that retains the warmth of the hands that made it. Forget trying to use a gold coin to buy a chicken in the market. The vendor would likely shrug, unimpressed. But present a finely woven strip of raffia? Now you're talking. This is a system where your net worth is quite literally your wardrobe, and a bad season for the raffia palms is like a modern-day stock market crash. The unit of this sartorial economy is the mpusu, a standard-sized piece of cloth, but its value is anything but standard. The quality of the weaving, the fineness of the thread, the complexity of the pattern, all of this determines its worth, creating a nuanced economic language everyone speaks fluently. A coarse, quickly woven mpusu might buy you a basket of vegetables, while a piece of the same size, but woven with threads as fine as hair and featuring an intricate design, could be worth a prime goat, or even serve as a down payment on a new house. You see, the mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked is that the Kingdom of Kongo had a sophisticated, thriving market economy long before European contact, and its primary medium of exchange was this magnificent, durable, and beautiful textile. It was an economy built not on abstract promise, but on tangible skill. So, you're a merchant, and you need to pay a debt. You don't open a ledger, you unfold a cloth. Fines for legal transgressions were paid in cloth. The famous mabondo, the tribute paid by provincial governors to the king in the capital, Mbanza Kongo, was measured and delivered in bales of the highest quality raffia textiles. A bride's family received cloth from the groom's family, weaving the two lineages together in a literal and figurative sense. When Portuguese traders first arrived in the late 15th century, they were utterly baffled by this system, but they were quick to recognize the exquisite quality of the goods. They wrote home about these silken fabrics, comparing them favorably to the best textiles Europe had to offer, and they desperately wanted in on the action. They just never quite grasped the deep cultural resonance behind every thread. It wasn't just inert currency. It was believed to hold a kind of life force, nkisi, a spiritual energy imbued during its creation. A piece of cloth woven by a master weaver for the king wasn't just expensive, it was potent. To wear it was to be wrapped in his authority. To present it was to transfer a piece of that power. A cloth used to seal a treaty wasn't just a symbol, it was the container of the agreement itself. Historians still argue whether this spiritual dimension was a later development influenced by religious practices or an intrinsic, foundational belief that made cloth the obvious choice for such serious social transactions. It's the difference between handing someone a signed contract and handing them a contract you believe is magically binding. The latter carries a bit more weight, wouldn't you say? Imagine the scene in a bustling marketplace, not with the clink of coins, but with the soft rustle of cloth. Transactions are conducted with careful inspection, fingers running over the weave to test its density, holding it up to the light to judge the evenness of the dye. A poorly made piece of libongo is like a counterfeit bill. It undermines trust and devalues the entire system. This reliance on quality control built a society that revered craftsmanship. The weaver wasn't just a laborer, he was a central banker and an artist, his loom a mint. And as you stand there, watching wealth change hands not through cold, hard metal, but through warm, soft, beautifully made fabric, you start to realize that this might just be a more civilized, more human way to do business. The journey from a tough, sun-hardened raffia leaf to a thread fine enough for a king's tunic is a story of water, patience, and sheer physical grit, an alchemy that feels almost like a superpower. You leave the marketplace, its rustling commerce fading behind you, and follow the process back to its most elemental stage. You're now standing at the water's edge, a slow-moving stream where the real magic begins. Those bundles of beaten raffia fibers you saw earlier aren't ready for the loom. They're still too stiff, too rebellious. So, they are submerged, weighed down with stones, and left to soak for days. This isn't a gentle steeping, it's a controlled rot, a fermentation that allows microorganisms to break down the rigid pectin and lignin, softening the fibers from the inside out. The air here carries a distinct, earthy, slightly sour smell, the scent of transformation. After their long bath, the fibers are laid out to dry, but they are still not the pliable threads you saw the weaver using. This is where you witness one of the most physically demanding steps, a technique that separates the novice from the master. A weaver takes a dampened bundle of these softened fibers and begins to roll them, not just with his palms, but with the full force of his body, up and down his own thigh. It looks uncomfortable, and it is. It's a repetitive, grinding motion that further separates and softens the individual filaments, creating a continuous, strong, and surprisingly fine thread. This is the origin of the thread that builds kingdoms, born from the friction of skin on fiber. It's a far cry from the sterile, mechanized spinning mills of the industrial age. This is spinning as an extreme sport, and the weaver's thigh is his primary tool. You can almost feel the burn just watching him. Now you have your spools of thread, but they are a pale, base tan color, the unassuming hue of raw nature. The next stage is what will give Kongo cloth its legendary visual punch, the dyeing process. And this is where the Kongo artists truly become chemists, leveraging a deep, generations-old understanding of their ecosystem. They don't have a pant one color chart, they have the entire rainforest as their laboratory. For the deep, rich blacks that were so prized, they used iron-rich mud from specific riverbeds, but it wasn't just a simple dip. The cloth was first treated with a tannin solution, often from the bark of certain trees, which acted as a mordant, a fixative that would bind the mud's pigments to the raffia fibers. After the mud bath, the cloth was washed and then often smoked over a fire, locking in the color and giving it a lasting, smoky scent. It was a multi-step, days-long process for a single, perfect, indelible black. For reds, they turned to the tukula tree, scraping its reddish heartwood into a powder that could be mixed with palm oil to create a vibrant paste. Yellows and ochres came from other roots, clays, and plants. The most sought-after color, a deep and brilliant blue, was the most challenging. Historians still argue whether the specific indigo plant used in Kongo was a native species or an introduction from other trade networks across the continent. The process of creating a vat of indigo dye is a finicky, almost mystical practice, requiring precise control over fermentation and pH levels to activate the color. A dyer wasn't just following a recipe, she was nurturing a living, breathing vat, a pot of potential that could either yield a magnificent azure or a disappointing sludge. Getting it right was a sign of supreme skill, and the resulting blue cloth was worth a small fortune. This entire operation, the harvesting, the beating, the soaking, the thigh rolling, the dyeing, represents an immense investment of time and specialized knowledge. A single high-quality piece of cloth could represent weeks or even months of coordinated labor from harvest to finished product. This embedded labor is the true source of its value. It's a concept that's hard to grasp in our world of disposable goods. When you hold a piece of this cloth, you're not just holding a material object. You're holding weeks of someone's life, their knowledge of the forest, the strength of their hands, and the patience of their spirit. It's dense with meaning before a single pattern is even woven into it. This is the palm's ultimate gift, not just the fiber itself, but the profound human effort required to unlock its potential, an effort that would soon be catastrophically undervalued by a world that only saw a product, not the soul within it. With a basket of vividly dyed threads at his side, deep mud black, brilliant tucula red, and that rare, precious indigo, the weaver becomes more than a craftsman. He transforms into a storyteller and a philosopher. His loom is his parchment, the shuttle his pen. As you watch him begin a new piece, you see that he isn't just creating a solid block of color. He is coding language and belief into the very structure of the cloth, using a visual grammar of geometric patterns that every citizen of the kingdom can read. This is where raffia cloth transcends its role as currency and attire and becomes a text, a map of the Kongo worldview. Each motif, each repeated design, is a word in a silent, tactile language. You're not just looking at a pretty pattern, you're reading a proverb, understanding a philosophical concept, or tracing a lineage. One of the most fundamental patterns you'll see is the simple, repeated triangle, often arranged in rows or concentric circles. To the untrained eye, it's just a shape. But in the Kongo visual lexicon, the triangle is profoundly symbolic. It represents the Kongo cosmogram, the Dike Nordia Kongo, a cross within a circle that maps the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The triangle's points can signify the 4 moments of the sun, dawn, noon, sunset, and midnight, or the 4 stages of human existence, birth, life, death, and the ancestral afterlife. When you see a garment bordered with these triangles, you are looking at a wearable diagram of the universe, a constant reminder of the cyclical nature of all things. Wearing it isn't just a fashion statement, it's an act of philosophical alignment. Then there are the lozenge shapes, the diamonds that repeat and interlock across the cloth surface. These often represent the scales of a crocodile, a creature of immense symbolic power. The crocodile lives in 2 worlds, water and land, making it a perfect mediator between the physical realm and the spiritual world of the ancestors. A cloth woven with a lozenge pattern might be used in a ritual context, its wearer invoking the crocodile's ability to traverse boundaries. Other common motifs include zigzag lines, symbolizing the path of the serpent and the journey of life with its twists and turns, and concentric circles, which can represent the community, the kingdom, or the cosmos itself, radiating out from a central, powerful source. Some scholars, examining the incredibly precise and complex repeating patterns, have suggested that Kongo weavers had an intuitive, practical understanding of fractal geometry centuries before the term was coined in the West. The way a large motif is composed of smaller, identical motifs, which are in turn made of even smaller ones, mirrors the self-similar patterns found in nature, like in a fern leaf or a snowflake, that form the basis of fractal math. The weavers may not have had the equations, but they had the eye and the skill to replicate the fundamental, recursive patterns of the universe they observed around them every day. Historians still argue whether this is a case of advanced mathematical conceptualization or simply the emulation of natural forms, but the result is the same, a textile technology that accidentally encoded complex mathematical principles. The mastery required to execute these patterns is extraordinary. The weaver must hold the entire design in his mind, counting threads, shifting colors with his shuttle at precisely the right moment. There are no printed patterns to follow. The knowledge is passed down through generations within guilds of weavers, who were often attached to the royal court. These men were not just artisans. They were keepers of sacred knowledge, the graphic designers of the kingdom's identity. A mistake in the weave isn't just a flaw, it's a mispronounced word, a grammatical error in a very public sentence. As you watch the pattern emerge, a series of diamonds within diamonds, a border of triangles pointing toward infinity, you realize you are witnessing a silent, rhythmic lecture on the nature of reality, one click-clack of the loom at a time. You've seen the cloth made and decoded its patterns, but now it's time to put it to work. Imagine you're a merchant from an inland village, arriving at the bustling central plaza of Mbanza, Kongo, the capital, with a load of smoked fish. You're not looking for coins, you're eyeing the piles of pottery, the baskets of millipedes, a local delicacy, and the fine iron tools on display. To acquire any of it, you reach not for a purse, but into a folded bundle you carry over your shoulder, your wealth, your raffia cloth. This is a currency you can wear, and its exchange is a tactile, social experience. The value isn't stamped by a central mint, it's negotiated on the spot, based on the undeniable quality of the textile in your hands. You unfold a strip of mpusu, and the potter runs her fingers over it, feeling the tightness of the weave, holding it up to scrutinize the evenness of the black dye. A nod, a smile, and the transaction is complete. Your fish is now her fish, her pot is now your pot, and the cloth is now her cloth, soon to be traded again. This system creates a fluid, dynamic economy where value is directly tied to craftsmanship. A weaver with a reputation for fine work is like a bank with a AAA credit rating. His cloth is accepted everywhere, often at a premium. But the use of cloth as currency goes far beyond the marketplace. Let's say you, a prosperous farmer, have a dispute with your neighbor over a stray goat that ate your manioc plants. The matter is taken before a village elder. After hearing both sides, the elder rules in your favor. The judgment isn't a fine payable in abstract units, but a specific number of mpusu of a specified quality. Your neighbor pays you directly in cloth, restoring the balance. The cloth becomes the physical manifestation of justice served. On a much larger scale, the entire political structure of the kingdom is lubricated by this textile economy. The kingdom is divided into provinces, each governed by a noble appointed by the Kongo, the king. Their loyalty and the province's integration into the kingdom are affirmed through the annual tribute, the mabondo. When the governor's caravan arrives at the royal court, it isn't carrying chests of gold. It's laden with rolls of the finest raffia cloth produced in that province, along with other regional specialties. This cloth is the lifeblood of the state, used to pay soldiers, reward loyal officials, and fund royal projects. The king's wealth is literally stored in vast textile treasuries, a fortune that is both immense and portable. You can't eat gold in a time of crisis, but you can trade cloth for food. Its stability relied on its imperfection. Unlike a gold coin that can, in theory, last forever, raffia cloth wears out. It can be damaged by insects, it can rot if stored improperly, and it simply wears thin with use. This built-in obsolescence, this mortality of the currency, was actually its greatest strength. It prevented the kind of hoarding that can stagnate an economy. The wealthy couldn't just lock their fortune in a vault for generations. To preserve their wealth, they had to constantly reinvest in new cloth, commissioning weavers, supporting the dyeing industries, and thus ensuring the continuous circulation of value and the perpetuation of the skills required to create it. It was a sustainable, circular economic model rooted in the reality of the material world. Historians still argue whether this system was a deliberate, brilliant economic innovation or simply a natural evolution from a barter system where the most universally desired, skill-intensive commodity became the standard. Was it a conscious policy or an organic development? The result, however, is undeniable. It created a society where the most fundamental act of economics, the exchange of value, was also an act of cultural appreciation. Every transaction was a silent compliment to the weaver's art, a reinforcement of the social fabric. As you stand in that market, watching a roll of cloth change hands for a finely forged hoe, you're seeing more than a simple trade. You're witnessing the heartbeat of a civilization, a pulse measured not in the clink of metal, but in the soft, rustling whisper of woven fiber. Now, let's dress you for power. You are no longer a merchant in the market. You have been summoned to the royal court in Banza, Congo, a city perched on a high plateau, its air a little cooler, its atmosphere thick with politics and prestige. Here, cloth is your resume, your diplomatic passport, and your suit of armor, all in one. The first rule you learn is that not all textiles are created equal, and wearing the wrong thing is a social, and potentially political, faux pas of the highest order. You see courtiers and officials draped in layers of raffia cloth, but the quality, the patterns, and the way it's worn speaks volumes before they even utter a word. A junior official might wear a single tunic of good, but not exceptional, cloth. A provincial governor, however, arrives swathed in multiple layers of the finest, most intricately patterned libongo, a walking display of his province's wealth and his own high status. He doesn't just own wealth, he wears it, quite literally, on his sleeve. The king, the man of Kongo, is the ultimate canvas. On important state occasions, he is a monumental, almost architectural figure, built from cloth. He wears layer upon layer of the most exquisitely woven textiles, some with patterns so complex and secret they are reserved for the royal house alone. These aren't just clothes, they are a cumulative display of the tribute he has received from every corner of his kingdom. Each layer represents a province, a people, an obligation fulfilled. When he moves, he doesn't just walk, he rustles with the weight of his entire realm. His regalia includes other items, a distinctive hat, a staff of office, and leopard teeth ornaments, but the cloth is the foundation. The leopard, or nkosi, was a powerful symbol of royal authority, and its spotted pelt was mimicked in textiles through clever use of applique or woven patterns, allowing the king to metaphorically wear the skin of the ultimate predator. But the royal wardrobe wasn't just about intimidation through volume. Specific garments held specific meanings. There was the mpu, a tall, cap-like hat made of raffia fiber, that was a primary symbol of kingship. To receive an mpu from the king was to be invested with authority, to become a part of his governing body. Then there were the prestigious veludos, a term the Portuguese later used meaning velvets. These weren't true velvets, but a testament to the incredible skill of Congo weavers who could produce a cloth with such a dense, shade pile that it felt and looked like European velvet to the astonished foreigners. This textile technology was a state secret, its methods closely guarded by guilds working directly for the crown. Wearing a veludo was a clear statement: I have access to the very best this kingdom can produce. Maintaining this wardrobe was a full-time job. You think keeping a modern suit wrinkle-free is a hassle? Imagine the specialized retainers responsible for storing, cleaning, and repairing the king's immense collection of textiles. They had to know how to combat mold in the humid climate, how to deter insects without damaging the fibers, and how to fold each piece to preserve its intricate patterns. It was a high-stakes profession. A mistake could damage a garment worth a village's annual tribute. Historians still argue whether the famous velvet cloth of Congo was a purely indigenous innovation or if the technique was inspired by early contact with European textiles, which then the Congo weavers mastered and surpassed with their own local materials. The evidence is as tangled as a knotted thread, but the result was a product so fine it became a legendary object of trade. As you stand at the edge of the court, trying to look appropriately humble in your own, now feeling quite plain tunic, you watch the ballet of power unfold through fabric. A courtier adjusts the drape of his cloth to show off a particularly fine border. A messenger arrives from a distant province and presents a roll of unique cloth as a credential. The king himself shifts on his throne, and the sound of 100 layers of raffia rustling is like the sound of forest leaves stowed by a wind of authority. In this world, you are what you wear, and to be underdressed is to be unheard, unseen, and powerless. It's a sartorial game with the highest of stakes, where the threads of raffia are also the threads of political life. The rustle of courtly finery fades, replaced by a different, more profound silence. You are no longer in the sunlit plaza but in a sacred grove or a darkened, consecrated space within a family compound. Here, cloth undergoes its most profound transformation, shedding its roles as currency and status symbol to become a vessel for the sacred, a bridge to the world of the ancestors. This is the cloth of the spirits, and its purpose is to mediate between your reality and one that is just as real, though unseen. In the Kongo worldview, death is not an end but a transition to the other side of a mirror, the land of the ancestors, the Nkisi. These ancestors remain active members of the community, and maintaining a proper relationship with them is essential for the well-being of the living. And the primary medium for this relationship is, more often than not, a piece of specially prepared textile. You might see a funerary scene where the body of a respected elder is being prepared for burial. They are not wrapped in a plain shroud. They are dressed in their finest raffia garments, the ones that spoke of their achievements in life. But more importantly, specific, potent cloths are used to swaddle the body. These textiles, often imbued with symbolic patterns of the cosmogram or the crocodile, serve as a protective covering for the soul's journey. They are a map and a passport, ensuring the ancestor finds their rightful place in the spiritual realm. After the burial, a piece of the deceased's cloth might be preserved by the family, becoming a powerful relic, a Nkisi object that contains a trace of their spirit. This cloth becomes a focal point for communication, an anchor that tethers the ancestor to their descendants. This spiritual function extends beyond personal ancestors to powerful, non-human forces. Kongo spiritual practitioners, often called nono, create and use complex power figures, also called Nkisi, plural, Minkisi. These are often wooden figures or bundles, but they are inert without their activation. And that activation comes from the careful, ritualized attachment of materials, medicinal herbs, shells, animal parts, and, crucially, cloth. The nono will wrap the figure in specific types of cloth, sometimes tying it tightly with raffia string. The cloth acts as a container, binding the spiritual force to the physical object. It's the battery casing for the sacred power. A Nkisi designed for healing might be wrapped in white cloth, symbolizing purity and the spirit world, while one for justice or protection might be bound in powerful black or red textiles. Some of the most powerful Minkisi used by hunters and warriors included packets of cloth that contained not just herbs, but also soil from a crossroads or dust from a footprint. The cloth was the perfect container for these ephemeral, yet potent, substances. It was believed that a cloth bundle worn on the body, charged by a nono, could make a warrior invulnerable to enemy weapons or make a hunter invisible to his prey. The cloth was the interface where the abstract power of the spell met the physical reality of the wearer's skin. It was spiritual technology, with raffia as its essential circuitry. Historians and anthropologists still argue whether the primary function of these ritual cloths was symbolic, a visual language for communicating with the spirit world, or whether they were believed to be physically transformative, actually changing in nature to become a conduit for supernatural force. Was the cloth a symbol, or was it the thing itself? The line, for the Kongo practitioner, likely didn't exist. The cloth, through its making, its patterns, and its ritual preparation, became what it represented. As you watch a nono carefully wrap a figure, each fold a deliberate act, each knot a sealed intention, you understand that this isn't superstition. It's a practical application of a cosmology where matter and spirit are woven from the same fundamental threads. In this sacred space, the loom's whisper is a prayer, and every piece of cloth is a potential gateway. The spiritual quiet of the sacred grove is suddenly shattered by a sound it has never known before, the creak of foreign timber and the shout of a language that curls around strange consonants. You stand on a bluff overlooking the Congo River's mouth in the late 15th century, watching as the carved, serpentine canoes of the kingdom cautiously approach a floating mountain of wooden cloth, a Portuguese caravel. This is first contact, a moment of mutual, awestruck assessment. The Portuguese, led by explorers like Diogo Cao, step ashore in their heavy woolens and polished metal, sweating under the equatorial sun. They are met by Congo officials, resplendent in their light, breathable, and exquisitely tailored raffia garments. The Portuguese stare, and you can see the gears turning in their minds. They came looking for gold and spices, but their eyes are locked on the cloth. They run their fingers over the fine weave libongo, feeling the velvet pile of the veludos. They are, to put it mildly, gobsmacked. The initial report sent back to Lisbon read like something from a fairy tale. They speak of a sophisticated, organized kingdom with a grand capital, a complex legal system, and a king who commands absolute respect. And they cannot stop talking about the textiles. They write of fabrics as fine as silk, of weavers whose skill surpasses anything in Flanders or Italy, of a people who use this beautiful cloth as their money. For the Congo, the Portuguese are a fascinating curiosity, men from the other world across the water, perhaps even returning ancestors. They are initially welcomed as trading partners and potential allies. The Manikongo, Nzinga and Kuwu, and later his son, Afonso I, see in them an opportunity to acquire new knowledge, new technologies, and to strengthen the kingdom's position. The early exchanges are, for a time, a meeting of relative equals, a cultural and commercial exchange. And what do they trade? The Portuguese offer goods that are novel and intriguing: glass beads, copper and brass manillas, bracelets used as a form of currency elsewhere in West Africa, wine, and especially, woven textiles from Europe. At first, this seems like a fair exchange, cloth for cloth. But there's a crucial, devastating difference. The Congo cloth is a luxury good, the product of immense skilled labor. The European cloth, by and large, is cheap, mass-produced wool and linen, often of inferior quality, flashy but poorly made. It's the equivalent of trading a hand-stitched, bespoke suit for a pile of polyester track jackets. The Congo elites, initially fascinated by the novelty, begin to acquire these European goods as exotic status symbols, not understanding that they are devaluing their own most precious commodity in the process. Some of the most sought-after European items were not the cloth itself, but the accessories that came with it. Elaborate hats, silk caps, and especially, shoes. The Congo, living in a climate where going barefoot was the norm, saw Portuguese leather shoes as the ultimate symbol of this strange, otherworldly culture. To wear shoes was to be like the Portuguese, to tap into their perceived power. It was a sartorial shift that seemed small but signaled a deeper cultural capitulation. They were starting to dress for the new audience that had arrived on their shores. Historians still argue whether the early Congo kings were naive in their dealings with the Portuguese or if they were shrewd politicians trying to manage an unpredictable new force, playing a dangerous game of diplomacy they believed they could win. Was Afonso I a visionary trying to modernize his kingdom through selective adoption of European ways, or was he the first domino in a chain of dependency? The letters he wrote to the Portuguese king, pleading for better quality goods and real priests instead of slavers, suggest a leader who saw the threat too late, as the very fabric of his society was beginning to fray at the edges. The loom's steady rhythm now had a counterpoint. the unsettling chop of axes from the Portuguese ships, being readied for a different kind of harvest altogether. That initial, wide-eyed fascination on the beach curdles quickly into a calculated, predatory strategy. The Portuguese, having sized up the kingdom, realize they don't need to conquer it with armies. They can unravel it through trade. They initiate a twisted commerce, one that systematically targets the very soul of the Congo economy, its cloth. The original, mutually beneficial exchanges of luxury goods are replaced by a brutal, lopsided barter. The Portuguese now demand vast quantities of raffia cloth, not as a prized commodity to be admired, but as a packing material, a cheap stuffing for the holds of their ships. Your kingdom's currency, the product of weeks of sacred labor, is being used as nautical bubble wrap to protect the very European goods that are making it obsolete. It's a deliberate, humiliating devaluation, an economic sleight of hand that makes a people complicit in their own cultural destruction. The demand for cloth becomes insatiable because it's the engine for a new, monstrous trade. The Portuguese, and soon other Europeans, have established sugar plantations on islands like São Tomé, and they need labor. Enslaved labor. And what is the primary currency used to purchase people from Congo and neighboring territories? It's no longer just European trinkets, it's the bales of raffia cloth, sourced from within the kingdom itself. Local rulers and traders, now hooked on a flow of European goods, especially guns, begin to turn on their own people. They use the cloth, the traditional symbol of social cohesion, to pay for captives who are then marched to the coast. The very fabric that wove the community together is now being used to tear it apart, stitch by painful stitch. You see the kingdom's wealth, stored in its textile treasuries, being physically shipped away to fuel its own demise. This creates a vicious, inescapable cycle. To acquire the European goods that now signify power, especially firearms to use against rivals, Congo nobles need to provide more and more slaves. To acquire more slaves, they need more cloth to use as the primary purchase currency. This puts an impossible, unsustainable pressure on the weavers. The sacred, time-intensive process cannot keep up with this industrial-scale demand. The result is a catastrophic decline in quality. Weavers are forced to cut corners, to use coarser fibers, to skip the days-long dyeing processes, to simplify the intricate patterns. The mpusu that was once a testament to skill becomes a shoddy, mass-produced token of a dying trade. The spiritual and artistic soul is stripped out, leaving only the hollow shell of a currency in its death throes. The Portuguese, in their records, begin to complain. They write that the quality of Congo cloth is not what it used to be. They bemoan the loss of the fine velvets and the intricate patterns, completely blind to their own role in its destruction. They created the demand that obliterated the craft, and then they had the audacity to critique the degraded product. It's like a logger complaining that the forest he just clear-cut doesn't provide as much shade as it used to. Historians still argue whether the Congo elite who participated in this trade were greedy, short-sighted collaborators or tragic figures trapped in an impossible dilemma, trying to preserve a shred of sovereignty in a world that was rapidly and violently reshaping around them. Was it a failure of leadership or an inevitable outcome when a non-industrial society collides with an expansionist, capitalist one? There are no easy answers, only the silent testimony of the cloth itself, which grows progressively coarser, simpler, and sadder with each passing year, a textile chronicle of a civilization being traded away for guns and glass beads. The pressure becomes a breaking point. The kingdom, once unified by the flow of cloth and tribute, is now tearing itself apart along the new fault lines created by the slave trade. You witness the unraveling not in a single battle, but in 1,000 small betrayals. The sound of the loom is drowned out by the crack of muskets, weapons bought with the very cloth that wove the social contract. The Manikongo's authority, once symbolized by the layers of tribute cloth he wore, phrase as provincial governors, now armed and financially independent from the slave trade, begin to act like petty kings themselves. Why send your finest textiles to a central authority when you can use them to buy Portuguese guns and build your own personal army? The kingdom's political fabric, mirroring the degraded raffia cloth, becomes thin and weak, susceptible to any sharp pull. This internal decay is violently exploited from the outside. In 1665, the Kingdom of Kongo faces a Portuguese-backed force from the colony of Angola at the Battle of Mbiwila. It is a catastrophe. The Congo army is defeated, and the Manikongo, Antonio I, is killed on the battlefield. His body is decapitated, and his royal Mpu cap and scepter are sent to Lisbon as trophies. It is more than a military defeat, it is a profound spiritual and political desecration. The sacred body of the king, the literal embodiment of the kingdom, is dismembered, and the symbols of his authority, intimately connected to the regalia made from their textiles, are put on display in a foreign land as curiosities. The central power of Mbanza Kongo never truly recovers, and the kingdom fractures into a collection of warring factions, each vying for control and access to the European trade. In this chaos, the systematic devaluation of Congo cloth becomes complete. With the political structure that supported the weavers' guilds and the tribute system in shambles, the economic incentive to produce high-quality textiles evaporates. The deep, generational knowledge of dye recipes, complex patterns, and weaving techniques begins to fade from memory. Why spend a month creating a masterpiece when a quickly woven, coarse strip of cloth will buy just as much from a Portuguese trader, who no longer appreciates the difference anyway? The artisanal ecosystem collapses. The master weavers, the keepers of sacred geometry, find no new apprentices. The dyers who nurtured the indigo vats abandon their craft. The cloth loses its voice, its patterns becoming simpler, its colors less vibrant, until it is just a utility, a ghost of its former self. In the midst of the violence and cultural stripping, a strange hybrid fashion emerged. Congo elites, particularly those collaborating with the Europeans, began to wear bizarre composite outfits, a fine, but now simplistically patterned, raffia tunic paired with a worn-out European-style waistcoat, a string of glass beads, and a Portuguese hat. It was a sartorial manifestation of their fractured identity, a desperate attempt to hold on to both worlds while truly belonging to neither. They were dressed in the tattered remnants of their own culture and the cheap exports of another, a walking allegory of the unraveling. Historians still argue whether the collapse of the Kingdom of Kongo was an inevitable result of the transatlantic slave trade's corrosive economics, or if a different series of political choices by Congo leadership could have preserved its sovereignty and cultural integrity for longer. Could a different king, a different alliance, have changed the outcome? It's one of the great what ifs of African history. But standing in the ruins of Mbanza Kongo, hearing the arguments of rival claimants to a shattered throne, the answer feels academic. The result is before you. The looms are quiet, the vibrant cloth is a memory, and the kingdom is coming apart at the seams. In the suffocating silence that follows the collapse, a faint, stubborn whisper persists. The great looms of the royal court may be still, but the knowledge of the weave did not vanish entirely. It retreats, like a rare plant, into a protected crevice, finding refuge in the margins. You find it now not in the capitals of kings, but in remote villages, in family compounds where an old woman's hands, gnarled with age but still steady, work a small, handheld loom. This is no longer about producing currency or courtly regalia. This is an act of memory, a quiet, stubborn stitch of resistance. The patterns she weaves are simpler, the dyes perhaps made from more readily available materials, but the motion is the same. The click-clack is a whisper against the roar of the slave ships and the muskets, a declaration that they have not taken everything. This resistance through craft takes on a powerful, symbolic form in the creation of minkisi, the power figures. As the physical kingdom disintegrated and the Portuguese influence, and later, that of other colonial powers, tightened its grip, the minkisi became more aggressive, more focused on protection and justice. And cloth remained central to their power. Nkisi designed to combat witchcraft or to protect a community from colonial depredations might be wrapped in a piece of old, high-quality raffia cloth, a fragment saved from better times, now imbued with the added potency of ancestral memory. The very act of preserving and using these old textiles was a form of defiance, a way of saying that the old powers still had potency, even if they were now hidden from the colonizer's eye. Then there are the textiles that begin to incorporate the detritus of this new, violent world. You start to see small pieces of imported cloth, a scrap of European wool, a strip of Indian cotton traded by the Portuguese, being woven into the raffia. At first glance, it might look like a mere shortage of materials, a forced improvisation. But look closer. The way the foreign cloth is placed, the patterns it creates when combined with the traditional raffia, tells a different story. It is a visual record of the encounter, a map of disruption. It is not a surrender to the new materials, but a subversion of them, a way of digesting the foreign object and making it part of a Congo narrative. The colonizer's cloth is captured and contained within the weaver's own framework. The tukula paste, the same brilliant red dye once used for royal garments, finds a new, more personal application. In the chaos of the slave trade, individuals and families began to use tukula to mark their belongings, including small, personal raffia cloths or bags. This wasn't just ownership, it was a claim of identity in a world that was systematically stripping people of it. Your tukula mark was your signature, your clan symbol, a tiny, defiant flower of red saying, "I am still here, I am still someone, and I belong to a people." It was resistance on a microscopic, deeply personal scale. Historians still argue whether these acts of cultural preservation, the hidden weaving, the adaptive minkisi, were conscious political resistance or simply the organic, stubborn persistence of habit and tradition in the face of overwhelming change. Did the weaver know she was a revolutionary, or was she just doing what her mother taught her? The line is beautifully blurred. In the end, the intention matters less than the effect. Each preserved pattern, each power figure wrapped in ancestral cloth, each red mark of identity was a thread that refused to be cut, a promise that the design, though fractured, was not yet lost. The pattern was sleeping, waiting for a time when the hands of a new generation might feel strong enough to pick it up again. The whisper of the handheld loom is eventually drowned out by a new, deafening sound, the relentless, mechanical thunder of the Industrial Revolution. In the 19th century, as the fractured territories of the old Congo kingdom are being carved up and formalized into European colonies like Belgian Congo, Portuguese Angola, and French Congo, a new kind of cloth arrives on a scale previously unimaginable. It is cheap, brightly colored, and seemingly infinite. It is factory-made, printed cotton, often produced in Manchester or other European manufacturing hubs, and it floods the African markets. They call it real cloth, a name that is itself a devastating piece of propaganda, implicitly branding the local raffia textile as false, primitive, and obsolete. Why spend a month beating, dyeing, and weaving when you can buy a bolt of this colorful printed cotton for a pittance? This isn't just an economic shift, it's a psychological and cultural coup. The colonial administration actively discourages traditional crafts, viewing them as backward and an impediment to progress, which really meant the creation of a cash crop economy and a consumer market for European goods. The intricate knowledge systems, which dye plants to harvest and when, how to maintain an indigo vat, the mathematical sequences for the fractal patterns, that were once passed from master to apprentice are now seen as useless folklore. The younger generation, navigating a colonial world that demands they speak French or Portuguese and wear Western clothes to get any semblance of a job, has less and less incentive to learn the old ways. The chain of transmission, stretching back centuries, snaps in the span of a few decades. The fading isn't a gentle decline, it's a rapid, violent erasure. The sacred groves where dye plants grew are cleared for rubber plantations. The rhythms of the harvest and the loom are replaced by the brutal quotas of forced labor. The colonial powers, particularly the Belgians with their notoriously cruel regime in the Congo Free State, systematically dismantle the social structures that supported the weavers' guilds. In this new world, a man's value is measured in kilos of rubber harvested, not in the fineness of the cloth he could weave or the wisdom of the patterns he could create. The echo of the loom is replaced by the crack of the kycoat whip, and the vibrant language of cloth is reduced to a desperate, fading memory in the minds of the elderly. Colonial anthropologists and collectors, in a twisted irony, began to actively seek out and acquire examples of authentic Congo textiles for museums in Europe. They saw them as artifacts of a dying race, relics for display cases. In doing so, they sometimes preserved the only remaining examples of the highest quality work, but they ripped them from their cultural context, turning living documents of philosophy and power into sterile specimens labeled primitive African cloth. The very people who helped kill the tradition became its archivists, building collections that were, and still are, largely inaccessible to the descendants of the weavers who created them. Historians still argue whether the total collapse of the Congo textile tradition was an inevitable consequence of global economic forces or a more deliberate, targeted cultural destruction by colonial powers to break the backbone of indigenous identity and facilitate control. Was it an accident of the market or a feature of the colonial project? The result, however, is starkly clear. By the dawn of the 20th century, the great weaving tradition of the Kingdom of Kongo is effectively silent. The forests still hold the raffia palms, but the hands that knew how to speak their language are gone, and the intricate, soulful patterns they once wrote into existence have faded from the world, leaving behind only faint, almost ghostly impressions on the fabric of time. The 20th century dawns not with a bang, but with a profound, echoing silence where the looms once hummed. For decades, the magnificent textiles of the Kingdom of Kongo exist primarily as ghostly impressions in the accounts of early Portuguese traders and as anonymized, poorly labeled specimens in the musty storage drawers of European and American museums. The memory of them within their homeland is a fragmented, painful heirloom, a story told by grandparents that feels more like a myth than a history of a tangible, recent past. But in the latter half of the century, a slow, tentative process of reclamation begins. It starts not in the Congo Basin, but in the academic institutions of the West, as a new generation of art historians and anthropologists, armed with a less condescending gaze, begins to pull at these lost threads, wondering what story they might reweave if they could only piece them back together. The pioneering work of scholars like Robert Ferris Thompson in the 1970s and 80s acts like a lightning bolt. In his seminal work, Flash of the Spirit, he didn't just describe Congo textiles as artifacts. He began the arduous task of decoding their visual philosophy, connecting the geometric patterns to the diagonal cosmogram and arguing for their deep, inherent meaning. He was one of the first to seriously propose that the weavers were operating with an intuitive understanding of fractal geometry. This academic recognition was a form of validation, a signal to the world that what was lost was not a primitive craft, but a sophisticated and profound intellectual and artistic tradition. It gave the fragments a voice, a vocabulary with which they could begin to speak again. Meanwhile, in museums, a quieter, more tactile form of detective work begins. Curators and conservators carefully unfold textiles that haven't seen the light of day for a century. They use humidifiers to gently relax brittle fibers, They painstakingly document every stain and repair, and they analyze dye samples to identify the specific plants used. In this process, they make startling discoveries. That black isn't just mud, it's a complex composite of tannins and iron oxides. That red comes from a specific heartwood found only in a particular region, allowing them to tentatively map the origins of certain cloths. This scientific analysis begins to rebuild the material biography of each piece, transforming it from a silent object back into a document of technology, trade, and taste. The advent of digital technology, high-resolution, multispectral imaging can reveal patterns and details faded to the naked eye. Databases can cross-reference motifs from textiles in different museums, identifying a signature style that might be linked to a specific workshop or even a known master weaver from Portuguese records. Scholars can now, in a sense, virtually reassemble the dispersed textile treasury of the kingdom, piecing together a digital ghost of a culture that was physically torn apart. It's a 21st century effort to solve a 15th century mystery, using satellites and algorithms to listen for the echo of a wooden mallet. Historians and art conservators still argue whether the primary value of these surviving textiles lies in their aesthetic and philosophical content or in their material composition as a record of historical technology and environmental use. Is the most important thing the pattern we see, or the chemical signature of the dye that tells us about the forest as it was 400 years ago? This debate is part of the ongoing process of understanding, a sign that the textiles are no longer seen as simple curiosities but as complex, multi-layered documents. The act of pulling at these lost threads is, itself, an act of reverence, a slow and careful attempt to untangle not just the fibers of the cloth, but the knotted history of a people. The scholarly resurrection in distant museums would mean little if it didn't eventually find its way home. And so, the story turns to a new generation of artists and cultural activists in Central Africa, who are now reaching back through the silence, trying to grasp the hands of their ancestral weavers. This isn't about nostalgia, it's a creative and often fraught endeavor to reconnect with a deliberately severed part of their heritage. You see them in studios in Kinshasa or Luanda, staring at photocopied images from museum catalogs, their fingers tracing the fractal patterns their great-grandparents might have known by heart. They are faced with a monumental task. How do you revive an art form when the living chain of instruction has been broken for over a century? The answer is not replication, but reinterpretation. Contemporary artists aren't trying to become 16th century weavers, they are in a dialogue with them. A painter might transpose the geometric logic of a raffia pattern onto a massive canvas, scaling it up to a monumental size that demands attention. A sculptor might use modern materials, discarded metal, plastic, wire, to construct three-dimensional versions of the cosmogram, creating a powerful commentary on resilience and transformation in a post-colonial world. Textile artists, often women, are at the forefront, experimenting with modern looms and imported threads, but guided by the old aesthetic principles. They are learning the language, even if they have to invent some of the grammar themselves. This movement is deeply tied to a broader cultural and political reclamation. As nations like the Democratic Republic of Congo and Angola grapple with the lasting scars of colonialism and conflict, looking back to the sophisticated achievements of pre-colonial kingdoms like Congo becomes a source of pride and a foundation for a new, confident identity. The intricate, intelligent patterns of the cloth are proof against the old, racist narratives of a primitive Africa. They are evidence of a deep history of science, philosophy, and artistry. Wearing a modern garment inspired by these patterns, or displaying such art, becomes a subtle but powerful act of decolonization, a way of wearing your history on your sleeve, quite literally, and declaring it to be a history of brilliance. Some artists and botanists are collaborating on projects to rediscover the lost paint box of the Congo dyers. They are taking surviving textile fragments to ethnobotanists, who are analyzing the dye compounds and then trying to identify the living plants in the remaining patches of rainforest. It's a race against time, as this botanical knowledge is also fading. The goal is to create a living archive of these plants, to once again have access to the true tucular red and the legendary Congo indigo, not just as chemical formulas, but as living, growing elements of the cultural landscape. It's an attempt to heal the ecosystem of memory itself. Historians and cultural critics still argue whether this artistic revival can ever truly capture the original spiritual and social context of the textiles, or if it inevitably creates a new, hybrid tradition that speaks more to the present than the past. Is a painting of the cosmogram the same as a cloth woven by a believer for a ritual purpose? Does it matter? Perhaps the most important thing is that the conversation is happening at all. The patterns, once on the verge of being forgotten whispers, are now being amplified into a vibrant, contemporary dialogue, proving that while a culture can be battered and suppressed, its deepest design principles can lie dormant, like seeds, waiting for the right conditions to sprout anew. So, where does this long journey through the rainforest, the royal courts, and the ruins of memory leave you, lying here in the quiet of your own room? The story of the Lost Textiles of Congo is not a simple tragedy of something beautiful that was destroyed. It is a much more complex tapestry itself, woven with threads of brilliant innovation, profound spirituality, brutal economics, and a quiet, stubborn resilience that refuses to be completely extinguished. You have followed the raffia thread from its birth in the palm leaf to its peak as the currency of a kingdom, through its deliberate devaluation and near-eradication, to its current, tentative re-emergence in the hands of scholars and artists. It is a story that holds a world within its weave. The legacy of these textiles is a ghost in the global machine, a reminder of a different way of being. In a world obsessed with the new, the fast, and the disposable, the Congo cloth stands as a testament to the value embedded in slowness, in skill, and in a deep, reciprocal relationship with the natural world. Its story forces you to reconsider what wealth really means. Is it a number in a bank account, or is it the accumulated knowledge and beauty a society can produce? Is power something you hold in your hand, or is it something you wear, woven with the stories of your people and the patterns of your cosmos? The Kingdom of Kongo built its world on the latter, and for a glorious period, it worked. The loss of this tradition is a wound, not just for the descendants of the kingdom, but for all of humanity. It represents a severed branch on our collective family tree of art and innovation. Every pattern that faded from memory, every dye recipe that was forgotten, was a unique way of seeing and interpreting the world that is now gone. We are all poorer for its absence. But the ongoing effort to pull at these lost threads, to relearn this language, is a form of healing. It is an act of defiance against the forces of cultural amnesia, a declaration that the past is not dead inventory but a living resource, a wellspring of identity and inspiration for the future. Historians, artists, and philosophers will undoubtedly continue to argue about the precise moment of peak artistry, the true catalyst of the collapse, and the most authentic path for revival. These debates are not a sign of confusion. They are the sound of a culture breathing again, of a story being actively wrestled with, its meaning contested and refined. The cloth is no longer a silent relic. It has been reanimated as a subject of conversation, a catalyst for creation, a mirror in which a people can see a reflection of their own profound and enduring genius. And as you feel the weight of this history settling around you, remember the final, gentle irony. The very forces that sought to replace and obliterate the Congo textile tradition, mass production, global trade, digital archives, are now the tools being used to resurrect it. The internet shares the museum images, the databases connect the fragments, and a new generation, armed with both a deep respect for the past and a fearless creativity for the future, is learning to weave the story forward. The loom fell silent, but the pattern was never truly lost. It was only waiting, patient as a seed in the forest floor, for the right moment to begin growing again. Word count, 1050. And so, as the final image of that growing pattern lingers in your mind's eye, let the complexities and the struggles of this history gently soften at the edges, allowing the sheer human achievement at its core to come forward. Imagine once more the weaver, not as a figure from a distant, lost time, but as a presence, his rhythmic motion a timeless constant. The specific sound of his mallet may have faded from the forests, but the echo of his intention, to create meaning, to build community, to speak with the spiritual world through the humble medium of a leaf, that echo transcends the rise and fall of kingdoms. It is a universal human impulse, one that connects you, across the centuries and continents, to that quiet, focused figure by the loom. Your own world, with its digital hum and relentless pace, can feel overwhelming, a stark contrast to the deliberate, thread-by-thread construction of that cloth. But in this moment, you can borrow a little of that ancient slowness, that deep focus on a single, growing line of meaning. The worries of the day, the endless list of things to do, they can all wait. They are like the tangled threads before they are sorted and placed on the loom. For now, there is only the peaceful, metered rhythm of a story being told, a pattern being completed. The kingdom's glory and its sorrow are now part of you, a layered history to be carried gently into your dreams, not as a burden, but as a testament to the beautiful, fragile, and resilient things we humans make, and sometimes, against all odds, manage to find again. So let your breathing slow to match that remembered rhythm, and let the darkness behind your eyelids become a canvas for whatever patterns your own spirit needs to weave tonight.